Hello there all and welcome to a brand new series here on the channel that I'm calling The Backlog Strikes Back, and it's something I've been thinking of for a while now, where I basically want to review and talk about games that I've missed that perhaps came out some time ago, and while it isn't very timely or relevant to talk about them anymore, I've only recently played them and I still want an outlet of sorts to discuss my thoughts on the title. So I thought, why not create an entire segment on the channel just for that? And since this is my first video for 2019, I wanted to wish you all a very happy new year. I hope you have good fortunes in the year to come, and I hope 2019 is fantastic for all of you. So, Shadow of the Colossus is the first episode of The Backlog Strikes Back, because the PS4 remake released now last year, which is weird to say, in February of 2018, and I picked it up around about a month after it came out in March. My story with the game is that I've of course always heard about Shadow of the Colossus being an all-time classic PS2 game, so I was interested in the PS4 remake when it was announced. So when I got it and I played it, it certainly struck me immediately as quite a unique experience, for sure. I played the first third of the game thereabouts, and then I did not touch the game at all from that first initial play session for around about 9 months or so. And it wasn't until just a few weeks ago in December that I picked up the game once again, and I finally beat it in just a few more play sessions. And it was certainly a unique experience that I loved and also kind of hated. I would say my relationship with this game after finally beating it is something that I don't think I've ever quite felt with a game before. I'm so split on the experience with the game overall. I'm sure many of you know all about Shadow of the Colossus, but if you don't, it's basically an open world game, one of the early open-ended open world style games, where your only task is to basically defeat 16 boss fights, these massive colossi, and that's really all there is to the game. The bosses aren't so much action based at all. They kind of each act as their own puzzle, as when you find them throughout the world, you basically just have to figure out how to defeat them. So in a weird way, it's kind of a third person open world-ish puzzle game, really, because the boss fights are grand and they're huge, but they're definitely not what we're used to when we typically think of what a video game boss fight is. Instead of, instead of shooting the enemies or attacking them and trying to whittle down the health or anything like that, it's basically trying to find weak points on them by climbing them and using the environment to your advantage and different things like that. And I don't want to be too specific, obviously, because since that is the entire gameplay, the game is quite short if you know what you're doing. I want to be vague because completing these puzzles that are the bosses, that are the colossi, is essentially the entire game, so if you know how to beat them, it kind of ruins the experience. The story itself is also incredibly simple and also vague, and I thought it was fantastic in setting a mood, setting a tone, and setting an atmosphere. Because the entire setup is, you're playing as this dude, he rides into this big world, this huge land, you've got no other context other than this, with seemingly his girlfriend or his sister or someone he knows lying on the horse who seems to be dead, and he comes to this land seemingly with the intent to revive her, and he's told to revive her he needs to kill the 16 bosses, and that's essentially it as far as the story goes anymore. Blue Point Games did such an amazing job of, because I have gone back and looked at the PS2 graphics comparison and things like that, they've done such a fantastic job at bringing this incredible world back to life, and it made me realise that this game was really ahead of its time on the PS2, not only from a design perspective, with it being open-ended, something that was relatively new at the time as far as I'm aware, but it was ahead of its time in terms of what it was trying to achieve with the story, with the atmosphere, like I said, and with its world, that the technical limitations imposed by, of course, PS2 hardware couldn't do. Like the PS4 can, the world itself is completely empty, except for the 16 bosses. There are no enemies wandering around, there's no other activities to do. It's a completely empty, beautiful, of course, but empty landscape when you're riding between these bosses. And the modern graphics, because this game honestly looks like a brand new 2018 game, it's not like an up-res remaster or something, it was remade from the ground up, it looks like a new 2018 game. And it's those modern graphics that help to achieve this isolated feeling that I had while playing the entire game. If I was playing the original PS2 game with these wonky as kind of graphics, like I said, ahead of its time, then I just don't believe at all that the game could have evoked the same feelings in me and provided me with the same experience with those hardware limitations at the time. And the score is absolutely fantastic. It's basically non-existent when exploring, but during the boss fights and during epic moments, it's awesome. And as I was playing through it, it honestly did feel like at the time, and I couldn't quite explain it really, but it felt like I was experiencing a piece of art. It really did. And it's because of that, and because of the story as well, those are the reasons that I'm really glad that I did end up playing this game. It, for me, despite it being an over 13-year-old game, I think it is, or something like that, it was really something quite new for me. I don't think we really get many games like this. And I think if what I've said at all in regards to the presentation and story intrigues you, at the very least, you should give it a shot. And I think it'll be worth your time despite its gameplay issues, which is where I just really struggled with the game, honestly. With the game, of course, being originally from the PS2 and it being a direct remake, I do understand that the control scheme is modernized from the PS2 version, but the gameplay is just... oh, it's frustrating at times, to be blunt. The controls can be best described in regards to how the player character feels as just really floaty. The bosses, the Colossi, are gorgeous, their AI is cool as, it's fun to climb them, it's fun to figure out how to beat them on paper, but in execution, it just didn't really work for me. A lot of the time, I found myself confused with what I was meant to do, but not for the right reasons. I feel like the designers wanted me to be thinking, how can I topple this beast? What's the smartest way in order to exploit its weaknesses? But in the end, I found myself just kind of doing things by trial and error and seeing if they worked, and there were occasions where I figured out correctly what you were meant to do, but I kept thinking I had to have been doing something wrong even though I technically wasn't. I just found that the controls and some of the behaviour of the AI to be quite frustrating. When I already knew for a fact what I had to do to achieve my goal, the fact that the game kept holding me back from doing it was incredibly obnoxious. So that side of the gameplay obviously directly relates to the combat, I suppose, or the boss fights themselves. In regards to exploration, the player character moves fine when you have to climb certain bits, that's okay. But I have to give a shout out, I suppose a negative shout out, to the horse riding controls when you're riding and exploring the world and moving between the bosses and things like that. The horse controls are some of the worst I've ever experienced in a game, especially when some of the boss fights rely on your horse so heavily. As a matter of fact, for some of them, your horse is required in order to beat the boss. So it's frustrating when, again, I know what I have to do to beat this guy, but my horse just will not respond to what I'm trying to do. I'll be under pressure, I need to get on my horse quickly, I know where I need to go, I know how I need to move, but because of the controls and the horse AI, it's really frustrating at times. And then again, that goes back to the discussion of, is this design intentional to give you the feeling that this horse is a real horse and it's, you know, it responds as a real horse should? That is obviously a discussion to be had perhaps. But at the end of the day, I think about when it comes to certain design decisions such as the gameplay and things like the horse AI, I evaluate those certain design decisions that are made and I think, did this enhance my experience in any way? And when I look at the horse AI and when I look at some of the gameplay choices and some of the movement mechanics, they did not enhance my experience in any way. They just pissed me off. However, obviously, with this being many people's favourite games of all time, the whole gameplay quote-unquote issues that I have with the game do not bother a lot of people. Whether that's down to just personal taste, or maybe it's just because of more experience playing these kind of games. I am, in the grand scheme of things, relatively new to video games. I never grew up with PS2 hardware, or even none older than that either. So it's quite possible that I'm just not quite used to playing games that feel older from a mechanics perspective. So the fact that I struggle with the controls could very much just be on me, because obviously it's not a problem for many millions of people out there who've experienced the game before. But nonetheless, it's something that held me back from going, yes, I love Shadow of the Colossus, I think it's a masterpiece, because while I love the presentation and while I think the game is presented masterfully, I don't think the overall game can be a masterpiece, because at the end of the day, gameplay is one of the most important things when you are playing a video game, and the gameplay on many occasions, and I would have to say probably 60-70% of the time, was frustrating for me. With all that aside, with those critiques I have aside, I really am glad I played Shadow of the Colossus. If it was a longer game, I don't know if I would have been able to stand those controls much longer, but it wasn't. It was a relatively short game. I think it took me around 7 hours to beat, something along those lines. I'm glad I played it. If you don't think the controls will put you off or the gameplay will put you off as I've described it, and you haven't played it before, definitely give it a go. Or even if you are concerned with some of the gameplay issues that I've presented today, maybe give it a go anyway. Maybe at the end of the day, you might have problems with it, but you may still be glad you played it like I am. But there you go. I'm glad to have talked about Shadow of the Colossus, and I'm glad to have played it like I said, because it is definitely a unique game, and it's a type of game that we really don't seem to get anymore, or at least I don't really seem to see them around. And there's no denying that it is very special in its own right. So there you go. If you've played Shadow of the Colossus, let me know what you think of it down in those comments down below. Down in those comments down, I said down twice. In the comments down below. If you are new to the channel and enjoy my incredibly quality content, be sure to check out some of my other content and subscribe if you like what you see. This has been SirCazz. Farewell.